Today on the show, I have Kathleen Gavin joining me to discuss her first producing job with Disney on the animated feature Oliver and Company. Kathleen enjoyed a 20-year career with Disney as she hopped around to numerous divisions while literally being a big part of saving Disney Animation as it was actively on the chopping block. Kathleen was brought in to streamline the animation process and to make the process repeatable for years to come. Decades of animated films later, it seems Kathleen succeeded in her mission. And that was with zero prior experience in the world of animation. Listen as we discuss the making of the film and the historic significance of this movie you might not initially think of when pondering Oliver and Company. Enjoy my conversation with Kathleen Gavin.
Prepare for some insight. You've tuned in to an exclusive DCTC interview.
Hello, Kathleen, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast. How you doing today?
I'm well, Jeff. How are you?
Good. This is technically your second time on the show because listeners heard you during a Nightmare Before Christmas panel that we did at Creep It Real. Yeah,
very good.
I included the panel in the podcast with the rest of the gang. So welcome back officially.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be focusing on Oliver and Company, which is a film you worked on. But first, I just want to start with, what was your first job with Disney and how did you get there? Was that like a goal or did you just kind of land there?
Not even remotely. It was Oliver and Company. It was my first, I got hired to do Oliver and Company. Peter Schneider was head of animation and I was the production manager. And between the two of us, we basically produced the movie. So,
how early on in Oliver and Company did you get involved?
Pretty early. I mean, I started it, I was on it for 2 years. So I started in February of 86. February 6th would have been my anniversary with Disney. I started February 6th, 1986, and I retired February 6th, 2006. I worked for the company for exactly 20 years.
I love that. I'm going to assume that was purposeful, the choosing of the date.
It was purposeful. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
I love that. So you're there early on in the process of Oliver and Company.
It was a little project. You know, they had done Black Cauldron, and almost all the resources were on Black Cauldron. And of course, Black Cauldron was pretty disastrous for the company. It literally took them 10 years to make Black Cauldron. So Black Cauldron took them 10 years to do. One of my mandates was, when they hired me, was not just to do Oliver, but to figure out a way not to take 10 years to do a movie. So that was a big deal at the time. It was also, animation had fallen out of favor with the studio. In fact, Jeffrey and Michael really wanted to shut animation down.
Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner.
Correct. And Roy Disney was its patron saint and said, no, we'll make it work. So there was a lot of pressure on the movie to be done in a timely fashion, because it's not you want it done fast, but you have to be able to make it viable, right? In terms of being able to do the movie in a reasonable amount of time, which, you know, translates to how much you're going to spend on the movie. And therefore, when it gets released, it doesn't have this kind of burden of trying to, you know, make more than it did. But the truth is, Oliver, when it was released, proved to Michael and Jeffrey that animation was in fact viable. It was Oliver that made money for the first time. And they went, oh, okay, we can do this. And so it served the purposes that Roy Disney wanted it to serve as well, to get out there. So in any case, it had been kind of motoring along in a very small way. There was a guy named Pete Young who was partners with George, and Pete had passed away. And so George was the single director on it, George Scribner. So George really was the one kind of spearheading it. And like any movie, there were probably 2 or 3 other things. I think after Black Cauldron, they made Great Mouse Detective. So when I got hired, they were making Great Mouse Detective. But a lot of the resources, a lot of people who had not really wanted to work on Black Cauldron were now working on Oliver. So we had really the best of the best. We had Glenn Keane, we had Mike Gabriel, we had Mark Henn and Ruben Aquino and Handel Butoy. I mean, we had really great animators on the project. So it was in story when I joined it. It was really, early on. So
if you were brought in for Oliver and Company, where were you before where they were like, oh, you're the woman for the job?
I had no animation experience whatsoever.
Wow.
I had known Peter Schneider. I'd worked with him in Chicago. We worked at the same theater, the St. Nicholas Theater in Chicago. And then I moved out here and I was doing, some film stuff. I worked on a couple of films, PAs and, whatever I could get. And then I was doing industrials for the Carnation Company and stuff. So I was doing stuff like that. And then Peter came, and they hired him to do the Olympic Arts Festival. So 83, 84, with the Olympics, there was an arts festival and there was a theater component, and I ran the theater component. So it was back with Peter. Tim Dizney also worked on the Olympics, the Olympic Arts Festival. So when they were looking for someone to come in and kind of revamp everything, Tim recommended Peter, who came in. I think from Peter's version of things, that Michael and Jeffrey were like, yeah, you might as well. It was like, it can't be any worse. Go ahead. That was Peter's deal. So I'm trying to remember. He probably started in the fall of 85, something like that. And then he called me to come in and meet. And I met with Don Hahn, who was in charge of production, George Scribner. And I love to tease Don because Don was not in favor of hiring me. Now, in fairness to Don, because he was like, she doesn't know anything about animation. Why would we hire someone who doesn't know anything about animation? And the only reason I got the job is George thought I was funny. So George was the tiebreaker. Peter wanted me, Don didn't. And then because I was funny, George said, let's hire her. So that's how I got the job. So
that's hilarious. I love that.
Yeah, and I also remember, and I want to tell this because it was amazing to me. So I remember it was on a Friday and it was kind of late by the time we got out of the interview or whatever. And we were walking around. It was after 5 and we're walking through the studio and they were over on Flower Street there at 1401 Flower. And so we're walking through and I said, Peter, where are the women? There are no women here. And he said, and here's why. It was after 5 o'clock. So the assistants had got home. They were the women. He said, well, Walt didn't think women could be animators. I said, Walt's been dead for like 20 years. What's that got to do with anything? How come there are no women? And I will say, over the course of our time there were more women who were brought in. But the truth is, the women were in ink and paint, and they were still on the studio lot, and animation. And there were, there was a background painter. There were cleanup artists who were women. But truthfully, there weren't really very many women working in feature animation at that point on that side in any case. So, yeah.
It's interesting that he referred back to Walt for that explanation, because when you were talking about the Black Cauldron taking 10 years and being like, this isn't sustainable, it just made me think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I don't know the exact number of years, but it's very well known that Walt would just be like, throw that all away. It doesn't work. We're starting over, whatever. And it took a long time. And obviously the budget skyrocketed because of it. And to think they were still kind of working that way in the 80s with Black Cauldron.
What happened, there was an interesting time period there. The 9 old men, right, who were all the way through, the guiding force of feature animation all the way through, had retired. They hadn't done a very good job. In fact, they'd done a terrible job of bringing along new people. So when I started on Oliver, Mike Gabriel was 27. Hendel Point was 20. They were all the same age because they all kind of graduated from Cal Arts or whatever art school they went to at the same time, and they were all hired into Disney about the same time because they needed new people. But they really had not done a good job there was no succession plan, let's put it that way, from going from the 9 old men to new animators. So it really was a big gap, and I think that's what part of the Black Cauldron problem was and stuff like that. So there was a big gap in there of having this kind of artistic energy that the new guys brought, and which was great. Those people came in and were really enthusiastic and really wanted to do it, and it was a good thing. I think the 9 old men had kind of softened over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Of course, Oliver and Company is based on the Charles Dickens book Oliver Twist. And, Disney has a history of pulling from historic tales for inspiration, especially if they're public domain. They like that. Do you happen to know, was there a department? Most studios have a department where they're just reading scripts all day and trying to decide what to make next.
I mean, I don't think at that time, I think Peter brought in a development group, but there was not really a development group, I don't think. I think it was left to directors, Ron and John, George and Pete Young, whoever else, to come up with ideas of what they'd like to do and pitch them. So there wasn't a development department per se at that time. Within a year or two, Peter had put together a development group that was, trying to figure out what our next projects were.
But was it always or most often look for public domain, look for classic tales, or were they looking at original scripts and stuff as well at that time?
I don't think there was a ton of original scripts. I mean, Great Mouse Detective, I suppose, but it's based on,
Sherlock Holmes, right?
Sherlock Holmes and Watson and stuff like that. So, but it was really the directors who came up with the ideas of doing stuff. So no, I don't think they were really particularly, it's got to be public domain.
Okay.
But they weren't soliciting scripts either. They weren't very script based. They were storyboard based. So there really weren't scripts per se either.
And I think, I could be mistaken, but I feel like it's still very much that way today. From what I understand, the Walt Disney Company, as far as animation goes, doesn't really take any outside submissions. It's really just the people there, which is honestly weird. I hadn't really thought about it a ton, but that's weird for studios.
Pixar was the same way. It was all internal. It's all, what they...
Sure, I put that under the same umbrella. Yeah. I'm thinking like the other majors.
But even when Pixar started, that's what it did. I can't speak to other majors. I worked at the Walt Disney Company, so I don't know. But no, we never... I mean, actually, if there was a policy, if an unsolicited script landed on your desk, that it was like a hand grenade. You had to you can't open it, you got to get rid of it, you got to give it to... Because also, the number of times the Walt Disney Company was sued, I remember, it was a Pixar project. I can't remember which one, but this guy had sent a script to somebody in the parks in Florida, and he contended that we did that movie based on, we never saw it, right? But people sued the Disney Company all the time. I bet every single movie, as it was coming out, somebody sued them.
Yeah, I get that, but it is a little strange, or I don't know. It's odd to be like, we're not going to take any submissions from professionals with agents, not strangers, but...
Right. Well, they hired writers. I mean, once they had an idea, but the ideas, I mean, almost, they also, even while I was there, they developed a thing, I think they called it the Gong Show, and anybody within the company could pitch an idea.
Yeah.
And things then went forward from that and stuff. So, I think I was always bitter. I pitched Three Musketeers. I pitched that. I thought it'd make a good animated movie. Mm-hmm. And it was killed. And then about 4 years later, there was a live action Three Musketeers. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Something. but it was certainly their process and the way they did it. And, Pixar did the same thing. But again, John came through Disney to there. And so probably there was a little bit of this is how we do it. So I think, now I can't tell you, I've also been gone since 2006. So I can't tell you in that period of time if they haven't had, writers submit things and stuff like that. But we had, on Oliver, we had James Mangold as a writer. And he's gone on to do quite a few cool things, So we would hire writers, but the ideas always came from within, and mostly, certainly at that time, directors pitched ideas. Later on, we had outside people coming to pitch stuff to us, but they were directors usually, animation directors. We had, who are the Gromit people?
Wallace and Gromit.
Wallace and Gromit, they came and pitched us ideas. There were two other guys who had worked at Wallace and Gromit and left, and pitched us, and we went very far with them, developing a script with them, and I was very sad that didn't get going. But so over time, people pitched us stuff, but again, it was mostly animation directors, not so much writers. But again, it is not script-based. It just wasn't script-based. We would have writers come in, and that was new even, I think, that was like a new thing to bring writers in. But it was after most of it had been storyboard and we needed stuff. And so, again, with Pixar, the same thing.
Fascinating. One of the things that really stuck out to me with Oliver and Company was, of course, Walt Disney Animation Studios. They're known for fairy tale-like atmospheres. If it does take place in a real location, it's typically during, an older time period. Oliver and Company, New York City in the 80s. So New York City in general, always a bit aggressive and hustle and bustle, but New York City in the 80s especially, dingy, dangerous. Was this a bit of a fight, or was it, I don't know, did anybody notice, like, this is a little weird for a Disney animated film to take place in modern times in such a gritty place?
It wasn't ever discussed in my, again, a lot of that, the idea to do Oliver predates me.
Was it always New York as far as you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. And then, that followed with the music with Billy Joel and Huey Lewis, who has that kind of gravelly voice. Everything came off of that. The other thing is there was just the start of CG at that point, right? Just the start of CG. And I remember we got, for the taxis, we got actual drawings from, I think, General Motors. We actually got things so that we could translate it into CG for some of those vehicles and stuff, because some of that is CG, and it was very early on stuff, very early on.
Yeah, I know that Great Mouse Detective has a bit of computer animation.
The clock. It has the clock. It has a little computer. It has a little computer animation, and then we have a little bit more. The scene where the scenes all with the railroad tracks and with subway, and Fagin has a kind of cart, a motor scooter cart with the dogs are all in the back, and with Oliver, and that was all CG. That was CG.
It's so funny. I was watching the Blu-ray and I was watching a special feature after, and there was just a little behind the scenes featurette that took place that, was from the 80s. It was made to promote the film. And they were talking about the excitement of, computer animation. We're using it a little bit in this, and it's very exciting. It's this new technology, but this is just to supplement. This would never, we would never animate a film completely with computers. And I was just like, oh God, that hurt a little bit.
I think you have to just look at the world. To me, each movie used more and more of it. But the characters obviously at that point were not being CG. It was more effects. CG was being used for effects.
Yeah.
And, too, I'm not sure you're aware of this, and I don't know if you want the nitty-gritty kind of goofy things, but for, 40 years, however many years, the painting of the cells had a very specific paint. And it had been developed over the course from Snow White to the next one, to, Lady and the Tramp, whatever. All this, it was the same paint. Well, of course, as things happen, because you're talking about now, we never would animate with CG, they never thought they'd have to get rid of that paint. It was toxic.
Oh, wow.
It was toxic, as you can imagine. So in the 80s, they discovered this is toxic. So I think, now this I'm not 100% sure, I think that Great Mouse Detective might have gotten painted somewhere else.
Oh, okay.
Not sure. I'm not sure about that. Not sure. But Oliver was painted in Burbank in the studio with a new paint. And, over time that paint had been developed because it was stable, it worked, it dried. I believe, I'm guessing there's some cells from Oliver that still aren't dry. That's my theory. And if you watch the movie, if you watch the character of Francis, it's kind of a yellowy color. It's moving. You can, there's times, because it wasn't dried from scene to scene, it just wasn't dried. So the company decided to create a system called CAPS, which was a painting system. And they went into partnership with Pixar and other vendors, but Pixar wrote the software. So we were, this is before we were making movies with Pixar, way before. we were doing this cap system because then Little Mermaid painted in China. So they knew they couldn't use that paint anymore, and it wasn't very successful on Oliver, so that paint was gone. So they painted in China, I think, for Little Mermaid. But Caps was then used for Rescuers. Obviously, I know this because I did Rescuers.
Rescuers Down Under?
Yes, Rescuers Down Under, not the first Rescuers, Rescuers Down Under. And it radically changed animated movies because now they could move the camera, which they hadn't been able to do for years and years and years and years. And if you look at Lady and the Tramp, it's 2 shots, 2 shots, 1 shot. It's cuts. It doesn't pan. They could only move the camera this way, a little this way, nothing. When you go to Rescuers Down Under, the camera's moving all the time. And so that system, which was created because we had toxic paint, totally changed how animated movies were done. You now pay attention to cinematography. You now pay attention to how the movie is laid out in a very different way than you did before.
That's fascinating because I'd always thought of Caps simply as adding the color, doing the painting. I had never thought of that as being the camera movement as well. That is really fascinating.
It was radical because if you look, the opening, is it the opening scene of Rescue Center with Marahute flying through and stuff? Glenn Keane did that. And it is based on Caps and that ability to do that. And the thing about it is, again, we never had to really consider that. So when we would have meetings talking about Caps, prior to Caps, so on Oliver, on all the movies, you could have 5 levels. You could have the background, maybe another sort of little bit, trees in the front, and then the characters or whatever. You could have 5 levels. That's all you could have.
Was that still multiplane camera?
The multiplane camera, they stopped using, okay. I don't know, maybe at latest the 50s or maybe the 40s, because, again, the multiplane was, this tower that they would have guys on it pulling layers and the camera would come through. It's wildly expensive. They had stopped using the multiplane years before. And so this mimicked that, but only it was. So I remember sitting in meetings and they were talking about Caps. Because, again, while we're doing Oliver, we're also planning how to do how to create this totally different system of doing the movies. And I remember they would say, well, the directors would have 100 levels, but they'll never use the 100 levels. To your point about, that I sat there going, you're telling me you think you're going to give a director the ability to use 100 levels and they're not going to use the 100 levels? Let me tell you right off, they're going to use the 100 levels.
That's awesome. You made me think of something when you were talking about the paints being toxic and them having to change that. Last year, I was given a little tour through Ink and Paint, and my mind was seriously blown because, honestly, it's one of those things that I've known about for years. I've seen documentaries about it. I've read books about it. It was not surprising how they did it, but seeing them do the process of Xerox to the inking, the painting, the Xerox, all that stuff, seeing them do it, I literally was in there thinking to myself, how had we ever had animated features? This is truly insane. And the thing that reminded me of it was when we were in there, they have bottles of paints all around, but the very few people who still work there, I think it's 4 people. They basically
they just do cells. They do cells
for museums and merch and stuff. But they said, this is the last of the paints. This is it. Once these are gone, they're gone unless we create a replacement. But they're not needed. And I think they said they're the only animation studio to still have the department like that for historic, significance. Fascinating. But
But when we did Oliver, that's the group that did the movie. I mean, they were there as a full on, because again, on Mermaid, it was all sent. Maybe they did animation check, maybe they did some things, but it was all sent to China to paint. So Oliver is the last movie that's actually painted by those people in Ink and Paint.
Wow. That's wild. And you mentioned they were on the Burbank lot, but I know there was a lot of stuff happening in animation at this point. Were you over in Glendale in the trailers yet?
Not the trailers. We were in a building. When I started there, animation had been moved from the lot because, again, I didn't know this. They were in disfavor. And they were moved onto Flower Street because Imagineering was across the street. We were on one side, Imagineering was on the other side. So we got moved to there, and people were bitter. They were really upset. And the people who got moved to Flower Street were upset. The people who got left behind on the lot were upset. I'm new. I'm like, get over it. I'm like, okay, you got moved. What's the big deal? So it was a little difficult. I will say this. I have never worked anywhere where it was harder to get accepted. Now, once I was accepted, it was great. But it took me about a year because I was seen really as, like I say, they thought, and they were not wrong, that the executives of the studios really wanted to shut the thing down. They totally wanted to do it. My job, which I don't think they understood, was to make sure you can make movies so you don't get shut down. That's my job. And, I would have these meetings with people, and it actually was great. I mean, it was a really good experience. There's a guy named Ed Hansen who had been there for years, and he and Peter were co-runners of the thing. And I would talk to animators, and they would tell me how they think it should go. And I'd go to Ed Hansen, and I would say, Ed, I'm thinking of doing blah, 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 blah. He said, oh, yeah, that's the way we used to do it. Almost every single thing I said, I think we should do it this way. Ed would say, that's what we used to do it. But I think, again, that gap between the 9 old men and the new guys, they needed different ways to do things because the new guys weren't up to speed really yet. So they had done all these workarounds, but they had gotten away from how the movies had been made before. The biggest example of that, and on Oliver, we were sort of stuck with things, but we changed it after that, is prior to, I don't even know when they started, but most of the movies that were made, they were made by characters. Units were created around characters. So if, you're doing Lady and the Tramp, there's the lady unit, and there's the tramp unit, and that's how it was done. At some point, they switched it over. Again, I think because they felt they didn't have strong enough leaders just yet to do it that way, and they did sequences. So a unit would be there to do all the characters in a sequence. And so the animators didn't like that. And, we were sort of stuck with it for Oliver because, the boat had sailed. But we went back to forming units around characters after that. But that's, again, an example of how to try to do things. When you talk in campaign, I love this. So again, I'm trying to figure out how to do these movies and get them done and, make sure we're giving the time we have to make sure artistically they're strong, but we also have to do it in a timely fashion. The other thing is they would make these deals with McDonald's and Mattel, and you had to make that release date. If you didn't make that release date, there was a lot on the line. So it was very different than what they had done before. So I remember I called, there was a woman who was in charge of Ink and Paint. I don't need to mention her name, but she had been there for 100 years or whatever. And I called her up because when I had talked to Don Hahn and I was scheduling the movie, he said, yeah, they do 5 feet a week per painter. I said, oh, okay, use that. And I did use that as trying to schedule the thing. So I called over there and I said, could you send me a list of, the painters and how many feet, figuring someone does 8 and someone does 3. And if they're doing, this is the one who does big scenes. So that's going to only be 2 feet a week. And then we have quick ones with one character that are 10, whatever. And I get a list and it's every painter and they each do 5 feet a week. I'm like, really? Could that possibly be true? So I'm like, I can't really. And that woman laughed, and a woman named Gretchen Albrecht came in who was fantastic. And what I learned on Oliver, if I could get the movie to Gretchen, the movie was going to get done. And she was in charge of ink and paint, inking, Xerox, animation, all that. If I could get her the movie would get done. And it was a great relief because I was running as fast as I can trying to do stuff when I didn't, the last year of Oliver, I worked 7 days a week.
Wow.
Not a good thing. Not a good thing. So, yeah.
Let me ask you, 5 feet of the work, how many seconds is that?
Is it 24 seconds? 24 seconds a thing or something?
24 frames per second. So how many frames
I don't know.
5 feet?
We didn't work on Nightmare, we worked in time. But in feature animation and hand-drawn, you didn't work in time. You worked in footage.
Interesting.
Or you worked layouts. Layouts were how many layouts you did a week. But an animator worked in footage. How many? Not I can do 3 scenes because it doesn't matter it's how much footage you get at. So it was scheduled based on footage, not on time.
Interesting.
And which was an interesting thing to do because, again, they had never really tried to look at that part of the movie. And so for me, what I tried to do is, again, talking to animators, talking to layout people, talking whatever, and trying to figure out how do you. What I say is this and I still think it's the truth, even when it's CG, whatever it is. Animation is an art form and a factory. You actually produce a product. You produce drawings, especially in feature animation, but in hand drawn. But it's the same in CG. You are producing a product every week, so you have to sort of marry the art with the factory part, which is good for people like me because then I'll have job security forever because they don't mesh very well. So trying to get those to mesh is the critical piece so that you're not, you're servicing the art. The factory part still has to be done. And so I would schedule the movie and I would go and one of the things that prior to this, again, I didn't work on Black Cauldron, but my understanding of things are like this. So let's say an animator was assigned a scene. I'd go in and say, okay, you're working on blah, 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 blah scene. Have you started? No, I don't have the layout. I said, you don't have the layout? No. Okay. So then I'd go to layout. And what I found was layout is working on different stuff, but these animators have been assigned this. So again, an animator is just sitting there wasting his time, or he's wandering the halls, walking over to layout going, do you have my layout yet? So my goal was to try to keep animators in their seats and working and having their scenes in their room. The other thing is you'd find they'd finish the scene and you go, I thought you finished the scene. I did. It's not in cleanup yet. Oh yeah, it's over there. It's on my shelf. And cleanup is sitting there waiting for work, right? So all I really did was try to, between departments, kind of do something. So I hired people whose job it was get the layouts from there to the animator. Don't have the animator walk over there to get it or ask for it, and make sure that layout is doing the layouts that the animators are going to need and not some scene that they're not going to need for 3 weeks.
Wow, so you're really like a taskmaster and it sounds like hyper organized. Are you that way just in life in general?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I'm very similar, and it sounds like you cracked the whip a little bit.
Well, it wasn't so. I didn't have to. I just had to make sure that the right things were happening. Yes, this is the other thing I did, which most of the animators were okay. I would go in every Monday to every animator, and I would say, okay, what are you working on? And they'd tell me. I said, can you have it by Friday? And they'd say yes or no or whatever. And if they said no, I said, how come? And sometimes say, well, I'm waiting on this or I'm waiting on that. And then I would go and make sure they got that. So the potential for getting it by Friday. Fridays were always the big deal because Fridays is when everything got turned in. And you either made your quota or you didn't. And I remember, and I'll say his name because I worked with him many times and we were good friends after that. But Jorn Klubing was an animator. And I walked into Jorn's office, maybe the third Monday in a row. And I said, well, what are you working on? He said, I don't like that you do this. I don't like that you come here and ask me this. And I turned to him, I said, well, Jorn, that's a problem because I'm going to be here every Monday. And like I say, I can say that because I worked with him on Rescues. I worked with him on Nightmare. I worked with Jorn many, many times. So evidently it was okay after a while. But I know he said, I don't like this. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to be here every Monday. So,
That's great.
And then once I paid, what was his name? Tony DeRosa. Yeah. the scene. He said, I don't think I can get it by Friday. And I said, I'll give you $5 if you get it by Friday. And so he did it. I gave him $5. So I used a lot of different things to get stuff done. Yeah.
That's great. With Oliver and Company, you can't help but look at the voice talent list. You have Joey Lawrence, Billy Joel, Cheech Marin, Richard Mulligan, Dom DeLuise, who I was so happy to hear, Bette Midler.
It was unbelievable. It was really so cool. It was great.
Yes, but why did that start happening? I'm not going to say this was the first necessarily to have celebrity voice in a Disney animated film, but there definitely was a switch, a mindset switch at one point of, deciding to have famous people in these films. Was this like a discussion like this will help sell the movie? Because I honestly I loved these performances, don't get me wrong, but I don't think you need celebrities to sell an animated film. I find it crazy the amount of celebrity talent that still today is hired.
Well, I would say two things about that. On Oliver, I can't speak to any other things, but if you think about Oliver's a musical. Oliver is a musical. And therefore, there was, in terms of what's going to make a good album, what are we going to sell afterwards? That was definitely a conversation. Chris Montan had taken over. It was a woman, I think her name was Carol. She was our music supervisor, but Chris Montan was the guy at the studio who was in charge of music on every project Disney did. And there is no more talented human being on the face of the earth, in my opinion, than Chris Montan. Smart, would really know who was edgy and who was new and who was whatever and who we could get. And I think he and George loved that. And I think in terms of it really was started, I think, by wanting to get good singers. So, which is why you had Bette Midler, why you have Billy Joel. Even the opening song is sung by Huey Lewis. He's not a character, but it's Huey Lewis. So really it was an eye to what can, as part of this movie, they'll sell an album afterwards. So I think it started with it being a musical and therefore starting to do those. I think also George likes that. Like George loved Cheech Marin. He wanted to put Cheech Marin in the movie. And maybe this is also it. I can't say, you'd have to look at the other movies. Again, I don't, the things that were done before me, I can't really say. But we had an outside casting company, Buck and Edelman.
Oh.
Susan Buck, and I don't know, but it was Buck and Edelman, two women, and they were our casting people. And I'm not clear. You'd have to go look. I can't speak to it. I don't know that Great Mouse Detective or Black Cauldron had, I don't know that not celebrities, but that they had an actual outside casting company, or was it done within the company? I don't know.
Gotcha. The thing that's kind of really interesting with Oliver and Company is, yes, you have Billy Joel because he can sing, but at that point, I don't think anybody knew whether or not he could act. So was that a conversation, and or were you in any of those recording sessions?
I was in the recording sessions. I was in all the recording sessions, and he was fun. And I think, George, let him be him. And I think really I think, again, as a singer and the kind of singer he is, he acts when he sings, right? So I think that really, I don't recall that coming up as a discussion point. And certainly Bette Midler, she was doing other projects at the company at the same time. She was doing some live action stuff with the company. She was fabulous. And then so again, it's really driven by music. So we get Bette Midler, who brings us Barry Manilow. And Barry Manilow writes her song for the movie. And we also had, again, Chris Montan, being the smart guy he is, Barry Mann. Barry Mann was a very famous songwriter with a partner, Cynthia something, I think. But they were really famous. You can look them up. They wrote tons of hit songs, really tons of them. He wrote one of the songs with Howard Ashman. Howard Ashman did the lyrics.
For Oliver and Company?
Absolutely. Yep.
Wait a second. Howard Ashman did lyrics for Oliver and Company.
For one of the songs, yeah. Yeah. I'd have to look it up. I don't know if it's the opening song.
Hold on a sec. I'm going to Google this.
You Google that. You just Google that.
I thought Howard Ashman's first involvement was Mermaid.
No, that's when he and Alan came to do stuff. And they were, they, again, radically changed how movies were made, musical movies were made.
Yeah, you just kind of blew my mind. The first song heard in the film, Once Upon a Time in New York City, that's the one that Huey Lewis sang.
Huey Lewis sings.
Co-written by lyricist Howard Ashman. I had no idea. If somebody had asked me that as trivia and this was like, what's the first Disney project Howard Ashman worked on, I would have bet $1 million it was Little Mermaid. Mind blown. I had no idea.
Yeah. So that's why I think when you talk about celebrities, I don't know why we started using celebrities. I can't answer that. Again, this is my first movie. I probably thought that was normal. It never occurred to me that it was different from what was done before. Although you had Peggy Lee. Peggy Lee was singing stuff, right? I mean, so...
Yeah, like I said, it wasn't like unprecedented. Like I believe the voice of King Louie in Jungle Book was a celebrity at the time. And it's just, it wasn't unprecedented, but it doesn't, I mean, that's a huge list. Joey Lawrence, Billy Joel, Cheech Marin, like that's a lot of celebrities. So it definitely seemed a choice.
Robert Loggia is the bad guy, really good. Roscoe Lee Brown as Francis, they were all great. Yeah, no, I think a lot of that's George, to be honest. George wanted it. We had a good casting company who could get people for us. But I also think it was really driven by the music. It started there. That's how sense. The Billy Joel, that's how the Bette Midler, getting the Huey Lewis. And like I say, we had really good songwriters, right? That's what Chris Montan brought to these projects for the first time.
Just because I'm a particular fan of these two and you were in the recording sessions, do you have any stories about Dom DeLuise and or Bette Midler?
Dom DeLuise was really funny and lovely, and, George had a great time working with him. Bette Midler, I was a huge Bette Midler fan, huge. I've seen her live. I had seen her in Chicago in a little club, in a little tiny club. And I remember talking with her and Barry Manilow, trying to figure out if maybe he was her piano player for that gig. We didn't know. We never did figure that out. But I really loved her, and she's tiny. She's a tiny person. And she also was pregnant part of that time. So it was, but I remember recording the song with her, with, Barry, and because she's so tiny, she's behind the music stand and you can't see her. You literally cannot see her. So she did it, and I just remember her like leaning sideways. How was it? Because she just you couldn't see her. So she was great, and really they were all really fun to work with. I didn't really for me, that's probably my favorite part of it. My absolute favorite part is scoring the movie.
Yes.
I love the scoring of the movie because I'm stunned. Like if I'm coming back, I want to come back as a studio musician because they're so remarkable. I had worked for opera companies, so it wasn't like I hadn't worked with, musicians. But, opera company, they know that. They come into the rehearsal having, played that score a million times. You come into a movie scoring session, you've never seen it. Never. You're playing it there for the first time. It's remarkable. I probably also liked it because I knew the end was in sight. I would be done at some point. But, the scoring of the movie is my favorite thing, and that was Jack Redford. Jack Redford wrote the music, the score for it. Beyond the individual songs. I have another trivia thing, but you probably know because you're this Disney geek.
I don't know. Maybe not. You shocked me with the Ashman thing, so go ahead.
Do you know that one of the songs was written by an assistant production manager and an animator?
Oh, I did not. Was it Why Should I Worry?
Oh, no. The song that the little girl sings when she's playing the piano.
Oh, yeah.
Was written by Ron Rocha, who was an APM on the movie, and Rob Minkoff, who was an animator. He wasn't an animator. I don't think he was an animator on Oliver. I don't think Rob animated. I worked with Rob on other things, but I don't think he worked as an animator on Oliver. That's something I don't think could happen today. That really was of its time. When you talk about in-house stuff and people bringing ideas, they played that song for George, and then they went to Chris. I mean, that wouldn't happen now, I don't believe, but it happened then. And so that song, written by an animator and an assistant production manager.
That's great. Now, you had mentioned how, there was this talk of Walt Disney Animation going away under Michael Eisner. And
yeah.
Was part of your job kind of keeping up team morale? Did you feel like that was a pressure put on you?
I think that's in my nature, somewhat. So I think that, yes, but it's probably what I don't think I did it for that purpose. I think it took me a while to understand why people were worried and whatever. And my job was to get this movie made and to try to, make sure we were getting George what he needed in terms of resources. I was just amazed at these people, that what they could do. And like I say, it took me about a year to get accepted. But once I was accepted, it was great. And I'm really so, when I run into people from that period of time and stuff, it's lovely. But I think it's also that I think what I did have to do, not so much on, being cheery and stuff, but I had to make sure I came through with what I said, because they were very suspicious. And that's why I say it's a year. I think once they understood, if I said, I will go try to get this done, I had to go try to get it done, hopefully get it done. If I didn't get it done, I had to come back to the person and say, hey, listen, this is why I couldn't get this done. And that, to me, was the most important thing I had to do with every single person on that movie, is make sure they knew if they told me something or they asked me for something, that I would do everything I could to get it for them. If I couldn't get it, I had to go back and say, this is why I can't get it. And I think that more than, I didn't think about it as morale, but I thought my credibility, and to be honest, I don't think that the term manager is a pejorative. I think a good manager does a lot of stuff that is things like, to be a good manager, you have to have credibility. Probably any job you do, you have to have credibility. But if you're going to manage people, you have to have credibility. And to me, that was a really important aspect, that I had to make sure I was credible. I remember, again, early on, there was a woman named Janet Bruce who was in charge of Animation Check. And so when they moved all the animators to Flower Street, they left Animation Check on the lot. She was very upset about that. She thought it was wrong. She needed to be where the cleanup people were because of the nature of her work.
What was she doing? What exactly was that department?
Animation Check is literally taking the drawings and making sure everything before, it's sort of the department between the artistic, and I'm not saying that in campaign it isn't artistic, but the departments of background, layout, animation, cleanup. All the scenes go to Animation Check to make sure they all work, all the drawings work, everything's right, and then it goes to ink and paint. So it's this one department that does that. And she was mad. She was just mad. And every time we had a meeting or whatever, she would go on and on about it. And I had said, I'll try to see if I can get you moved over, or whatever I said, I don't know. And she just said, well, everybody promises me. They promise and nothing happens. And I turned to her and I said, listen, if I can't get it done, then you can blame me later, but don't blame me now when I haven't even tried. And that's, I had to prove to them, first of all, they were suspicious of me because I didn't know a damn thing about animation. I worked for Peter. Peter was the new guy. Peter was having his own issues of proving himself to everybody to be accepted. You had the old order of the Ed Hansons and, that world. And then you had Peter and this kind of new world. And so to me, the biggest thing I could do was to, be credible and have them be able to trust me.
Since you didn't have that animation experience, did you enjoy it immediately, or did it kind of take you a while to start enjoying that job?
Well, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about it. I like puzzles, so it was a puzzle for me, and I liked the dual mandate. I had two mandates: make the movie and figure out a way to do the movie that was sustainable. So, and really create a system of doing things that would go on to the next movie and the next movie and the next movie.
And did that system go on?
Yes. To my knowledge, even as recently as 10 years ago, they were doing reports that I created,
Wow.
Whatever. But I would say the only reason I did Rescuers Down Under, frankly, was, Tom Schumacher asked me to. And Tom had worked for me on the Olympics, so I knew Tom from them. And Tom really wanted me to do it. And I said, well, I will only do it because what I knew, it's like that kind of thing is, doing Oliver was just running as fast as I could. You were just running, you were on the treadmill, just running all the time. And I knew that there was a way to do this. I had learned my mistakes. I had learned what didn't work. I learned what did work. I'd say I did Rescuers because I wanted the chance to prove that there was a way to do this more efficiently and better. And that's why I did Rescuers Down Under. And so, yeah.
And you ultimately ended up enjoying animation.
Yes. Although I swore that every project was my last one.
20 years later.
Yeah, 20 years later. Oliver, I was going to leave. I was leaving afterwards, and Tom's the one who talked me back into Rescues. And then I was going to leave. This is really goofy because I'm goofy, but I had worked in theater. You know, if I was an equity stage manager, and if I had an equity gig, I had insurance. But then if my next gig wasn't equity, I'd have to buy my insurance, and then I would drop my insurance when I got my next gig. So I had sworn to myself I wasn't going to drop insurance, because when you get insurance again, it's more expensive because right. So I thought, I'm never dropping my own insurance. I'm just going to keep my own insurance. I kept my own insurance for about 17 years at Disney. I kept thinking I was going to leave. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Obviously, we talked a little bit about this, but Oliver and Company used computer animation not only to enhance this film, but I'm sure test things for future films as well.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Mike Cedino and Tina Price. That was our CG department. There may have been others. I don't remember them, but Mike Cedino and Tina Price.
That's funny. And of course, there was the traditional hand-drawn animation being done with it. Were you still using the Xerox process that started with 101 Dalmatians? Yeah.
I think so. I think it's the same one, yeah.
Yeah, crazy.
Because it was mostly Xeroxed, and specialty scenes were inked. For the most part, it was Xerox, and there were specialty scenes that were inked.
I got to tell you, as I was watching the film, there are certain shots, and listen, like we said, the computer animation was tested for the future as well, but there were certain shots that looked like they were pulled directly from Oliver and Company and put in Little Mermaid. There are just certain shots, the way the camera moves and follows certain things. I'm like, this is kind of fascinating. And it wasn't just me that noticed. A friend I was with as well. I was like, looks, there's one in particular. There were a few times this happened, but the one I'm remembering is a shot of following some birds in the sky. And this is going to sound so well, that's just coincidence. But I'm telling you, the way it moves, the way the birds move, the way the camera moves, it's just like the opening of The Little Mermaid, which was fascinating.
Little Mermaid had a scene that looked like Oliver?
Yes.
Are you talking? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You have the same artist working on everything, so that's not that shocking, I guess. I don't know.
It just seemed purposeful. I can't speak to
that.
It seemed purposeful. But obviously, listen, 1988, it's an interesting time at the Walt Disney Company with animation. It's before that was The Great Mouse Detective. Directly after that, The Little Mermaid, which was just an absolute game changer. So obviously it was happening simultaneously with Oliver and Company. Do you remember hearing any rumblings about Mermaid? Were there huge expectations?
I worked on Mermaid for a little. I think I did the budget for Little Mermaid, and I recall they had Alan Menken coming in to write music, and I had to set up a room for him and stuff, because they hadn't hired anybody to do Little Mermaid yet. I did stuff on Little Mermaid, but that was early days. Here's my story about that period of time. And so, truthfully, it was that Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg just did not believe animation was a viable thing. It wasn't going to make money. There was no point. But I recall this, and this was on Oliver. We would pitch boards to Jeffrey. Jeffrey would come over, I don't know, once a month or whenever he came over. So we would show him boards. It was always maybe every 6 weeks. It's always a big deal to show him. And of course, it's not what they're used to, right? Jeffrey worked in live action. He works in television. The way animation works is radically different than those things. That's to your point about scripts. We don't have a script to submit to you and say, hey, approve this project. That's not how it works, right? So I remember we were in the theater. We had storyboards, and most of them were up on easels, but we had more. And so there were ones that were on the floor, and they're big 4x8 storyboards, and then leaning against the walls and stuff like that. And I remember I was just, because I'm a bystander at that point. It's George and the story people and animators and stuff pitching things. And on one of the storyboards, there was one of the ones sitting on the ground. George was pointing to Jeffrey, telling him what was happening. And Jeffrey, in his nice, very expensive suit, got down on his hands and knees and crawled along looking at the storyboards that George was telling him about. And I remember thinking, that guy's hooked. That guy is not an uninterested observer here. That guy wants to be part of this process that he's looking at. And of course, obviously, from there. So I think that I think Oliver did a lot. And then when it came out, it made money. It made a lot of money comparatively. I mean, now it's not compared, but I think what did we spend on Oliver? Maybe 25 million or 24 million, something like that, which is ludicrous. And then it made 70 something. So, for that period of time, that was huge.
31 million, according to the Google.
Well, no, the 30, yeah, but you can't, right, okay, but the production costs, they add distribution costs, they add all the marketing costs, they add that. So I don't know what that is. So, but I think our budget was around 25 million for the movie ultimately. But yeah, they would add that would include those other costs. But still, I think it made in the 70s in its first release, something like that, which now sounds crazy, but at the time that was a huge, given that Cauldron they'd taken a bath on, and really the only other movie that had made what was the Spielberg thing with dinosaurs?
The Land Before Time.
Land Before Time.
So I wanted to talk to you about this because Land Before Time also came out in 1988, same year as Oliver and Company. It was directed by Don Bluth, who famously left Disney and took a ton of animators with him. Land Before Time is a masterpiece. I'm curious, were you guys keeping your eye on that? And if you had any thoughts on that releasing the same year, and did you feel it was competition?
When did it release in 88? It released before us.
Well, yeah, because Oliver and Company was November.
November, yeah.
Oh, November as well. November 18th, 1988.
Oh.
Damn, you two were up against each other.
And we did fine. That's my point. We did fine. I think that what Oliver proved to Michael and Jeffrey and to the company as a whole was that animation was viable and that they could make money with it. And that was a huge thing, because the other thing, which Roy Disney knew this, but again, for Jeffrey and for Michael, where they came from, they did not know this. Animation feeds the company. Animation still feeds the company. I was in Florida. There's a Frozen ride. There's a this, there's a that. Animation feeds the company. And Roy Disney knew that. And that's why he was so you can say we made this X amount of money, but how much money did we make on merchandise? How much money did we, all those movies fed into the parks. All of them fed into the parks. The movies fed into publishing, right? Because they would do books on that stuff and that would get sold. Merchandise. Animation is huge in terms of a company like the Walt Disney Company. And Pixar knew it, John, because he had worked at Disney. John never came down to Burbank without going over to the marketing department to say hi.
John Lasseter.
Yeah, he knew that was a critical thing. I don't know that there's any other company in existence that animation plays as critical piece of the bottom line of the other divisions of the company. I can't think of one.
Yeah, I mean, DreamWorks is owned by Universal now, and they put some stuff in the parks. But I think, yes, Disney, it's different level. Do you happen to remember, was Oliver and Company represented in the parks at all?
I don't remember. So one of my jobs after that, I did a lot of, I had this group that Ralph Guggenheim, maybe? He was a producer at Pixar, and he called my group the Lunatic Fringe. And because after I came back from doing Nightmare Before Christmas, all my projects were either outside the company, like Pixar, or I did a lot of stuff for the parks. We did, or Fantasia 2000, or Dinosaur. We did these kind of oddball projects. And so I did a lot of stuff for the parks. I don't remember on Oliver, but it would have been maybe after me. I'm not sure. It's hard for me to judge because on every movie we met with WDI all the time, but I don't know that if we had established that habit on Oliver. But certainly all the projects after that, we were always meeting with WDI to see how they could mesh together. Always. While we made the movies, we met with WDI.
Wow, so the theme park stuff was happening. Yeah, at a certain time you could see that, right? Like Lion King, I don't know the exact dates, but it was like when the film came out, a parade was ready. Now they're much more hesitant. They're like, let's see if it makes $1 billion, and then we'll really consider putting it in the parks.
One of the things for my little division is I did A Bug's Life. I did, for the parks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I worked on A Bug's Life with Pixar. But
it's tough to be a bug.
Stuff. Yeah, it's tough to be a bug. We did that. My little division did that and stuff. But it's hard to tell when, I can't say in my memory when that started, but we were certainly always meeting with other divisions and stuff, and always the marketing. Even Oliver, really big time in terms of McDonald's and doing deals with these other companies so that we did it. So, and I'm not taking anything away from Land Before Time, but in terms of the impact on the company, Oliver was the first one for them to go, okay, we need to do this. And they really started to focus more and more and brought in people like Howard Ashman and Alan Menken and started to do stuff on a different level.
I remember seeing an interview, I think it was Michael Eisner talking to Diane Sawyer for some ABC News thing or something, and I think it was in promotion of Mermaid. And she says, how much these films cost, can you guys afford to keep doing this? And Michael, and I'm paraphrasing, he says something like, no, but we have to. This is our legacy. And so that's really interesting. I mean, that's just a year or so shift of mentality of we can't afford to do this to we have to do this.
And the truth is, I don't know when that interview was done and whether it was long enough, but the fact is, Oliver, Little Mermaid, Rescuers Down Under, I'd say even Lion King, Nightmare Before Christmas, they were all made for a certain amount of money that was pretty reasonable. Mm-hmm. When I came back from doing Nightmare, budgets had gone through the roof, and it was a whole different world. I mean,
because the process got more expensive, or because artists were getting paid way more?
So it's a combination of things. So the movie started to make money, and they gave artists bonuses, which was great. But then when Jeffrey left, now you have this competition for artists, and that's when salaries really went through the roof. And when Jeffrey announced, I remember Peter Schneider had taken his children, his girls, down to Disneyland, so he wasn't there. So Tom and I had to go building to building, making sure everybody was calm.
One thing I have to say thank you to Oliver and Company for is a great big fiery death of a villain. Oh my gosh. You guys had a real death, not a fall into the fog, but what a cool action sequence at the end.
Well, that would be George and his story guys. And
I love that. So I have a kind of a weird question. I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts on.
Okay.
So these films in the 1980s, obviously, they were projected on film in movie theaters. As they've been released through the years, they've gotten enhanced for DVD and then Blu-ray. And a certain quality is lost. Enhanced, but also lost. Like when you watch the Blu-ray, it doesn't feel tangible. It doesn't feel hand-drawn anymore. And I'm just curious, as someone who worked on these films, do you have any thoughts on that matter?
I just think it's part of the process. I think that's going to happen. And yes, you're right. But, if you look at all these movies and you look at generationally, can kids watch things? Can kids watch Snow White? Can kids watch? They can, right? But I'm not sure that, I'm always surprised when someone says to me, and this is the calls I get, I was watching this movie with my grandchildren. And your name went by. Is that you? Yeah, that's me. Okay. But I'm always surprised because I think they're all just watching Frozen and they're all just watching the most recent of things. Oliver, oddly, was kind of more successful than Rescuers, although Rescuers also made money. I never made a movie that didn't make money in terms of those movies. But it wasn't as popular, I'd say, as Oliver had been. But I still get people call me and go, I was watching Rescuers Down Under with my grandchild. I'm like, really? These things have legs that you don't realize they have. And part of that process is maybe re-releasing things on a new medium. You know what? You can't just have it, we've gone through, whether it's VHS and many, many different iterations of things that these things have been released on. And, still, as much as we all know when you watch things on a big screen, it's different, right? That's still, but the majority of people these days are not watching on a big screen at all. I get what your point is, but I don't, it's inevitable.
Before we get out of here, I just want to touch on real quickly, you worked on the film Dinosaur from 2000, which that was like real landscape shots with computer animated dinosaurs added. Revolutionary at the time. And then, of course, The Nightmare Before Christmas, that classic stop motion. You've worked in hand-drawn when it comes to Oliver and Company, Rescuers Down Out Under, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have a preference when it comes to animation style as far as working and or simply enjoyment?
You know what? My enjoyment is, I don't know why this is, okay? If you look at what I did through Disney and what I did forever, all of those things, for some reason, I was always asked to do things I didn't know how to do. So I think that is my enjoyment. I got to do things I didn't know how to do. And that was even the Pixar stuff, right? I mean, when I had been doing Nightmare and they came over to talk to me about, the Pixar people came to talk about how to do budgets and how I scheduled Nightmare, which was, whatever. And then, of course, when I came back, my job was to oversee those kind of projects and to help Pixar. They were making 12-minute shorts. That's not the same as making an 85-minute feature. It's not just scalable. It's just a huge difference. And so for me, the enjoyment was doing things I didn't know how to do.
Well, you did a lot of stuff you didn't know how to do, and you figured it out.
I did a lot of stuff I didn't know how to do. Most of my career was doing stuff I didn't know how to do.
Honestly, though, what an honor that people had that much faith in you to give you those chances. I mean, a lot of people want to do different things and just get pigeonholed in a certain thing. And you had quite the opposite experience, which is really admirable.
I was really lucky, and I think that is why I could stay at Disney for 20 years, because I have a boredom. I get bored, to be honest, really, I do. And probably I can only do the same job for maybe about 5 or 6 years. But for me, it was lucky because Disney was willing to let me do it. And I have to give a lot of that credit to Peter Schneider and Tom Schumacher. That really, they were the ones who, pushed me in one direction or another and, let me do stuff that maybe somebody else wouldn't have let me do.
I love it. Well, fantastic. Kathleen, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you being here. And, honestly, you've enlightened me on how historically significant the film is, because it's not one that I feel like a lot of people talk about, but there was a lot of important stuff happening at that time. And it was the last film before a major shift with the animation renaissance of Mermaid. So
yeah,
it's fascinating.
And Caps and how things were shot. And also it was the first musical that had been on in forever, right? It was an actual musical. And then again, Little Mermaid is a musical.
Yeah.
And it's designed that way. And that was the influence of Howard Ashman as well, of how if you're on Broadway and you're looking at a musical play, it's structured in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And Howard brought that to our movies as well. He brought that with Little Mermaid and Aladdin and stuff like that. So there's a lot of people who had pieces of this puzzle. And I really think, as I said, Peter Schneider and Tom Schumacher in terms of trying things differently, and a Chris Montan who really brought, the music of these projects to a new level.
Perfect. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Kathleen. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, Jeff.
Now it's time to bring in Meredith from Mini Memories Travel for another Disney vacation tip. But before we get to that, we're going to chat about a little bit of news. How you doing today, Meredith?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you, Jeff?
Pretty darn good. We did get, over the last month or so, we got some news worthy of mention. I do want to mention, folks, we got a final day announcement to experience Muppet Vision 3D. It's going to be this June 7th, 2025. Along with that closing, Pizza Rizzo is closing. So essentially, that whole Muppet Courtyard area will soon be behind construction walls as they prepare to build the Monsters, Inc. land. But just curious, Meredith, where does Muppet Vision lie in your heart?
It was probably my first 3D that I'd ever seen on a big screen. So for me, it's pretty big. And I still go to it often. I look for the key under the mat and all the little things. So for me, I'm going to miss it, but I do agree it's time to move on.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would never move on from Muppet Vision 3D if it were up to me, just mostly for its historic significance. It was Jim Henson's last film that he directed. It's also the original of the attraction. Only one other was built here at Disney California Adventure, but that closed a long time ago. So it has some serious historic significance. I am curious, though. Was there ever a tip that you had for your clients related to Muppet Vision? As that like you'll no longer be able to tell them? Like, was it a go-to spot if it's raining or something like that you would kind of go to?
Exactly. It was my, in every park I have the few things that I'm like, when your kids are melting down, when you're really just tired, you don't want to wait a long time, and you want to get out of the heat, out of the sun, or out of the rain, Muppet Vision is always one of them. And Pizza Rizzo was also kind of one of my little... People didn't go there a lot. It wasn't busy a lot. So it was always a place to get a quick bite that you didn't have to worry about the crowds as much. So I am going to miss having them as part of the experience.
Yeah, so if you're going to Disney's Hollywood Studios before June 7th, I would suggest definitely checking out Muppet Vision 3D one more time. As of right now, there has been no announcement as far as a special event for a closure or specialty merchandise. I'm assuming, with no inside knowledge whatsoever, I'm just assuming there's going to be something special to say farewell to this. I really want to see, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I have such a love-hate relationship with this, but remember back in the old school days of Disney MGM Studios where we had like the walk-around Muppet characters?
Oh, yeah. That would be amazing.
I would love to see them bring those characters out. I say it's a love-hate thing because I always prefer seeing Kermit as Kermit and Miss Piggy as puppets and not walk-arounds. But God, if my nostalgic little heart doesn't have a place in there for those walk-arounds, I think it would be great to bring them back. My dream scenario I mentioned on the podcast was I was really hoping, and clearly this isn't going to happen, but I was hoping there would be a little overlap between Muppet Vision 3D closing and the Rock and Roller Coaster redo with Electric Mayhem opening. So there'd be like a couple weeks where both were there and they could throw a really cool event. It's not going to happen, clearly, but, June 7th, they gave us a good amount of time to get there one last time.
Yeah, to say goodbye. It is, I'm with you. I'm a Jim Henson lover, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Jim
Henson fan would be the right word.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm a little sad, but I do, like I said, I kind of get it. It is lightly attended, which works in the favor for tips and tricks on a break, but it's sad.
Yeah, it is sad. And as of right now, we have no closing date for the current Rock and Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith, which will eventually become a Muppet takeover there with the Electric Mayhem, but no closing date yet for that. Another bit of news, the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser, the quote-unquote Star Wars Hotel, which was that multi-day experience with that giant price tag. Did you book any of those?
I did. And I was about to go with my son, and he got sick, and we didn't get to experience it. So I was a little sad.
Yeah, I would be. If I had a trip booked and didn't get to do it, I would be bummed. I was in the class of just no way in hell am I putting out that kind of money for that. So when it closed, I'm going to say something that I feel terrible saying because I know a lot of people worked really hard on this and the intention was great, but I was happy it didn't work for the simple reason that it was the first time, honestly, that I've seen Disney fans push back and be like, yo, way too expensive. Because we keep seeing these crazy things like $400 Premier Pass Lightning Lane things and selling out. And I'm always saying to myself, I'm like, where's the threshold? Like, when is enough enough? And Galactic Star Cruiser was kind of that message to the Walt Disney Company, like, yo, this is enough. This is too much. And for that reason, I'm happy it didn't work out in its current or its, past form. I would love to see it used again for guest interaction, but the news we got is it's going to be taken over by Walt Disney Imagineering as offices as they develop things for Disney's Animal Kingdom and, of course, the Monsters, Inc. land at Disney's Hollywood Studios, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to become an office building, which will be one of the coolest office buildings in the world.
It's sad, though. I mean, the amount of creativity that went into creating that was a lot, and it was immersive, and it was, my clients who went loved it. I mean, they were huge fans, and, it surprised me. It was some of my more budget conscious clients who booked it first, and I was very surprised, but they felt that passionate about being immersed and having that experience. And now, honestly, they have bragging rights because not many people got to do it.
I do think it'll be back someday in some form. I really do. Whether it's a half-day thing or a one-day thing, I don't know. I mean, obviously there are hotel rooms there that would go unused, but I think it'll be back in some form. I don't think they're just going to let it remain an Imagineering office for, over 5 years or anything. That's my gut.
I hope not, because it is incredible. I got to walk in. I have been in on a familiarization trip, and it takes your breath away. And we didn't even get to have the greeters and all the, the characters there, but we got to see the space. And I think it would be a shame to have it not be, and I said this right when they announced the closing, I'm like, I think this is silly that you spent this much money and not one of you brilliant people can come up with something to do with it as a half-day experience or a full-day experience, and really just waste all of that.
The theory out there is that it was like a tax incentive thing to close it. So, which is why I think in the future it will come back. But who really knows what the story is? Someone does, but not me. And yeah, Walt Disney Imagineering offices, that's kind of wild to think that that's happening. It's also kind of wild that that became like news. It doesn't really affect the public, but the public was interested. But in any case, moving on from there, have you seen the short little film, The Last Verse, starring Richard Sherman and Bob Iger? Have you heard about this?
I am racking my brain because it's ringing a bell, but not getting there.
So Disney legend Richard Sherman, him and his brother Robert, the Sherman brothers, they wrote all those classic tunes for Disney, one in it being It's a Small World. And there's a short film. Yeah, so the last verse, there we go. That clicked it for you. So the Last Verse film is about Richard Sherman sharing a new verse that he wrote for It's a Small World, sharing it with Bob Iger. And you can find it on YouTube. It might even be on Disney Plus. Yeah, well, on July 17th, on the 70th anniversary, the exact date of Disneyland, the last verse is being added to the It's a Small World attraction in Disneyland. I was hoping for this. I was kind of assuming this was going to happen when they started really, they were promoting that little short film quite a bit and showing it, at D23 and various other places. And I was like, this is going to end up in the attraction. And I'm so happy it is. I love Dick Sherman and, it's a beautiful honor for him. And what a perfect date to do it, the 70th anniversary of Disneyland.
I love it. And honestly, that song could use some more words too for the length of the ride. So I love it.
That's why I enjoy the holiday version, because they sprinkle in the Christmas tunes, and I'm like, a little break. So, yeah.
I have to tell you, my family makes up their own words. I have 3 boys, and we got stuck on it once and made up some not child-friendly words for the song. Our boat was luckily filled with mostly adults, and they were teens, and we had a lot of fun with it. I wish I'd written them down, because it was being stuck for 45 minutes on It's a Small World with it continually playing was, but it's a great memory now for me.
Yeah, I've never been stuck in there, thankfully, but that's 45 minutes of that is honestly, like, you would think they know. And listen, we love It's a Small World, but everybody working there knows it's a tune that is, it's an earworm. You would think if this thing breaks down more than 5 minutes, 10 minutes, shut off the sound.
They did not.
Amazing. One other thing I want to mention that D23, the official Disney fan club, is doing, if you are a gold member of D23, they now have D23 Gold Theater that is happening once a month. I checked out the first one. Actually, this ties in with Richard Sherman because what they showed the first month was the Richard Sherman celebration that was part of D23, the Ultimate Disney Fan Event, in August of 2024, which is a panel that I missed when I was there just because there's so much going on. So I was happy to get to see it. And if you are a D23 Gold member, I highly suggest you checking them out. They're doing them once a month. It's complimentary, and it's nice because I know a lot of Gold members don't live in Southern California or Orlando, and so a lot of the perks they don't get, but this is something you can enjoy from anywhere. So D23 Gold Theater, check it out. Other than that, I'm curious, did you have any fun little Disney excursions or experiences over the past month?
My big Disney news is I just got invited to sail on the Dream with my husband and a whole group of travel agents. And so not going to Disney or seeing a Disney thing right away, but it's been a long time since I've planned my own Disney cruise. And it was fun picking out excursions and, booking us at Palo and doing all those things that I do for other people. And it was exciting to do for myself and be like, my husband's never been on a Disney cruise. So bringing him is exciting. I've done it with my kids, but now I get to do it with him. And I'm excited.
It's more fun when you're booking that stuff for yourself, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, it reminds me of the joy I'm bringing to other people. And it's a great thing that Disney does to keep us excited and keep us fresh on the product and keep us in loop. And it brings magic to me, which I think I bring to other people, hopefully, with my planning. And it was really exciting for me, and will be when I get to go in April.
Awesome. Well, for me, I finally got to see Mufasa. Did you see Mufasa?
I have not yet. I can't wait to. And I can't even, when you say Mufasa, I want to do the whole Mufasa and like shiver.
Mufasa. Yeah, I did not love the first remake of The Lion King, so I wasn't really in a rush to see Mufasa. I love The Lion King, the animated film, but I didn't love the first one. I will say I enjoyed Mufasa more, basically because I always love taking a step back and looking at the origins of things in beloved tales. So, we discover how Rafiki got that walking stick and how Pride Rock formed and how Scar got his scar and stuff like that. And I always love that kind of same story, different angle. So that was fun, but I had one major issue with it. And Timon says something that drives me up the wall. First of all, the story's being told to Timon and Pumbaa. They're really not necessary. They're just there for comedic relief for kids. I get it, but not my favorite part. But at one point, Timon says, "I'm nothing but a sock puppet." And he's referring to the Broadway musical, The Lion King. And I was like, I literally was in my seat and he goes, "Yeah, the play. I'm nothing but a sock puppet." And I was just like, wait a sec. Are we supposed to believe that this little meerkat in Africa is familiar with the Lion King musical, which he is a part of, and he's seen it to know that he's a sock puppet? It drove me nuts. I gotta tell you, crazy.
I'm that girl too, and I pick it out, and then I have to like whisper it to who I'm sitting with, and they're like, "Stop!" Oh, now, all right. I can't wait. You've actually made me really excited to see it, and I was with you. I was not it wasn't on my list of what I needed to get to right away, but now you made it. I want to go.
Yeah, check it out, and you'll hear that weird breaking the fourth wall reference from Timon, which is interesting. But speaking of Timon, of course, the original voice of Timon is Nathan Lane in the animated film. I just went to a TV taping over at the Walt Disney Studios here in Burbank, California, of a new sitcom starring Nathan Lane called Mid-Century Modern. And have you heard of this show at all?
Yes, again, I can't place why I know it.
Okay, well, it's not out yet.
You're stumping me.
It's coming to Hulu, and it's basically Golden Girls with gay men living in Palm Springs instead of Miami. And it's the same show. It's the same archetypes and everything. We got Nathan Lane basically playing the Dorothy role, Matt Bomer playing the Rose role, Nathan Lee Graham as the Blanche role, and then Linda Lavin, before she passed away, was like the Sophia role. So they actually had to write her death into the show, and so partway through this first season, they're dealing with that. I went to the season finale of the show, and Richard Kind was the guest star. That actor is the voice of Bing Bong. So I was at this TV taping with the voice of Bing Bong and the voice of Timon, and it was a lot of fun. And yeah, it's got 10 episodes. It's coming to Hulu, dropping all 10 episodes on March 28th. So check it out. So if you're watching the last episode and you hear what sounds like a Jeff DePauli laugh, it was a Jeff DePauli laugh, because that was me in the studio audience, and it was a lot of fun. It was a fun one, so check it out.
I loved Golden Girls growing up, and so I'm excited to see that, and anything with Nathan Lane makes me happy.
I mean, it's the reason I went. I really didn't know anything about the show. I just saw Nathan Lane, and I saw it was at the Walt Disney Studios, which is like literally a stone's throw away from me. So I was just like, yeah, why not? And then I discovered it was like Golden Girls-esque. I was like, okay, this will be interesting. And frankly, it's just really smart. It's the creators of Will and Grace plus Ryan Murphy. So I was like, okay, like this, it's on paper, it sounds like a slam dunk, right? Golden Girls for gay men. Hello. That's who's watching the show anyway. So seems like a slam dunk. I'll be very curious to see how this goes. And, they're not picked up for a second season yet, but I will say everybody seemed very hopeful who was working for the show that this would go beyond 10 episodes. So check it out, March 28th. With that, Meredith, what is your tip for this month when it comes to planning a Disney vacation?
My tip for this month is get off your phone. Disney has made
I love this tip. I love this tip.
Disney has made this app that, is a wonderful tool, but it's a tool. You're not there to spend your time on your phone. We do too much of that already. So know the app. Yes. Take the time to, if you're on the plane going down, play with that app. If you don't have time before you get to the park, do it on the bus. Do it when you're in a position, but do not do it the whole day long. Figure out how to use it correctly. I love mobile ordering. So when I'm waiting in line, my kids and I will sit there, whoever I'm with, and we'll pick our food so that when we get to the restaurant, we can click on here. I love being able to book my next Lightning Lane if I paid for it. But I do it. I set a 2-hour timer. Done. Do not waste all these precious moments at the parks on your phone.
Yeah, I've told this story before on here, but I don't think I've told it to you, where when Disney Genie, the free service, first launched, I had zero interest in it, but I was like, for the sake of research, I should probably check this thing out. And I did it at Disney's Hollywood Studios. And I had the app on my phone. I was like, oh yeah, let me try out this Genie thing. And I walked through the gate and I'm playing with the Genie app, and I'm, already getting frustrated by it. And it's already trying to upsell me stuff. And I was like, no. And I looked up from my phone. And when I did, I was already at the Chinese theater. And I just said to myself, I missed all of Hollywood Boulevard, like literally all of it. I saw nothing as I was walking, playing with this app. And yeah, I'm honestly kind of an advocate of that just in real life in general. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm still on my phone a lot, but I am very willing, able, and happy to like put that phone on airplane mode wherever I am, if I'm just like, I need a break from this thing. So I wholeheartedly agree. A Disney vacation, and I like what you said, do it on the plane, do it at home before you leave, do it while you're being paid at work before your vacation. Download that app, play around with it, because admittedly, there is a learning curve to it.
There is. And that's, like you said, you walked down and you missed. Those are precious moments. If people get to do one trip and they miss the moment of seeing the faces of their own face, their own feeling of seeing the Chinese theater or the castle or the Epcot ball for the first time. And that's when you see, if you stand there and watch, you will see hundreds upon hundreds of people with their nose in their phone because they're trying to learn how to use that app because they waited until They went, how do I get my ticket up?
Yeah, I'm going through this right now where I have 3 generations of family. We're all going to Walt Disney World in March, and we we all have to connect to each other's accounts through the app and stuff, and like it's never easy. It just isn't. Like once again, on paper, this should be simple, but there's just always exceptions and complications. And connect with everybody before you go on the trip, I would say. And if there is that one person in your family who's just tech savvy and kind of enjoys that kind of stuff, maybe put them in charge of that, because if your accounts are all connected, they should be able to play with everybody's in theory, correct?
In theory. That's another tip. If you're traveling with just your family, use one account. It gets rid of some of the Disney IT issues. So yes, in a big group, you're going to have to, and you want to do some of your own things and have your reservations. But when I go, let's say we're staying in a villa, anyone in the villa, we're on one account. We're on my account. And everyone's logged in and everyone can do and make those things. It gets rid of some of the clunkiness that you're talking about, booked for everyone. And it just makes it a much simpler game. And I know a lot of my clients are like, no, my wife wants her own account. Well, I want my own account. They always come back and they're like, okay, Meredith, you're right. We made these and you linked them and we just logged in on one account and it made all the difference.
Nice. Excellent. Well, if you want more tips like that, Meredith was kind enough to make a handy dandy top 10 tips for visiting Walt Disney World. This is a document that was created specifically for Disney Coast to Coast listeners. And thank you for doing that, Meredith. To get Meredith's top 10 tips for visiting Walt Disney World, simply contact her and ask for the Disney Coast to Coast bonus document. You can find Meredith's contact info using the Mini Memories Travel link in this episode's description. And don't forget, Meredith can help you plan any sort of vacation you'd like at zero cost to you. Anything else you'd like to add, Meredith?
That's it. Just that I'm excited to help anyone plan their trips and love working with Disney Coast to Coast. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you next month.
Bye.
Now, folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll be back next month with another. If you're looking for more before then, be sure to check out the DCTC catalog featuring hundreds of different episodes with a wide array of topics and conversations. If you enjoyed today's episode, you might also enjoy DCTC episode 1132, where Kathleen Gavin previously joined me with voice actors Chris Sarandon and Ken Page, along with artistic coordinator Allison Abadi, as they discussed The Nightmare Before Christmas. Whether you're in the car, cooking dinner, planning a Disney trip, or enjoying a shower, Disney Coast to Coast has episodes available for you to enjoy 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. DCTC Patreon members can join me and Kyle Burbank from laughingplace.com during our Disney Catch-Up Zoom sessions. Join by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description. This episode has been executive produced by Jeffrey Riccio. Gain rewards like Jeffrey, including access to never-before-heard episodes and more, by becoming a Patreon member yourself. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description, from the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!